Why discipline beats talent in American success stories. The night the fire took everything, Jackson Cole was supposed to be in Boston. He was supposed to be sitting in a leather chair at a publishing house on Beacon Street, sipping sparkling water, listening to editors praise his debut novel, the one he'd written in 6 weeks during his senior year at Yale, the one that had earned him a 6-figure advance before he'd even graduated, the one that was going to make him the voice of his generation. Instead, Jackson was standing in the pouring rain on a cracked sidewalk in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, watching flames consume the row house where his mother lived, where his younger sister Mia was supposed to be sleeping, where every photograph, every letter, every trace of the life he'd taken for granted was turning to ash and smoke. The fire trucks screamed down South Trenton Avenue, red lights painting the wet pavement. Neighbors stood in doorways, clutching robes and phones. Jackson didn't move. He just stared at the second-floor window, the one with the faded curtains his mother had sewn herself, and felt something inside him collapse that had nothing to do with the burning building. "Jackson!" A voice cut through the rain and the sirens. He turned, numb, and saw his sister running toward him from the corner store, a bag of chips still in her hand, her hair wild, her eyes wide with terror. "Jackson, I was at Deshawn's. I was just at Deshawn's." He grabbed her, pulled her close, felt her shaking against his chest. She was 16. She was alive. That was all that mattered. But their mother was at the hospital. Night shift. She'd been a nurse at UPMC Mercy for 23 years, working doubles to put Jackson through Yale and keep Mia in Catholic school. She'd never read his novel. She'd never had time. She'd never made it to any of his readings, his award ceremonies, his graduation. She'd sent a card with $40 and a note in her cramped handwriting. "So proud. Love you always. Mom." The card had burned. Jackson knew it without being told. He could see it in the flames. The row house was a total loss. The insurance, what little there was, wouldn't cover half of what they needed. His mother moved into a studio apartment near the hospital, sleeping on a pull-out couch, waking at 4:30 a.m. for shifts that left her too exhausted to read anything longer than a medication chart. Mia went to stay with their aunt in Allentown, dropping out of her junior year, taking a job at a Wawa convenience store to help with bills. And Jackson? Jackson went back to his apartment in Brooklyn, the one his advance was paying for, and stared at the blank page where his second novel was supposed to be. He had talent. Everyone said so. His professors at Yale, his agent in Manhattan, the reviewers who'd called his debut a blazing arrival, and the work of a prodigy. He'd never outlined a chapter in his life, never revised more than twice. The words just came, flowing from some mysterious source that he assumed would never run dry. But now, sitting at his desk in the dark, listening to the traffic on Atlantic Avenue, Jackson felt something he'd never felt before. Nothing. No words, no images, no story. Just emptiness, vast and terrifying, where his gift used to live. 3 months later, his agent called. "Where's the manuscript, Jackson?" "I need more time." "You've had more time. Your publisher has a slot, spring catalog. They need to start marketing." "I know I'm close. I'm really close." A pause. Then, have you considered that maybe you're blocked? That maybe you need to step away, clear your head? Jackson laughed, but it came out wrong. I'm not blocked. I'm just figuring it out. Jackson. His agent's voice softened. I've seen this before with talented writers. The second book is hard. It's the hardest, but you can't force it. Maybe take a trip, go somewhere, reset. He hung up and looked around his apartment. The expensive furniture, the framed reviews, the stack of unread books from admirers who expected great things. Everything he'd built on a foundation of natural ability, on the assumption that genius was enough. And he realized, with a clarity that felt like falling, that he'd never learned how to work. The diner was called Marie's, and it sat on a stretch of Route 22 in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, between a shuttered steel mill and a Walmart that never closed. Jackson found it by accident, driving aimlessly after another failed morning at his desk. Another blank page, another panic attack that left him sweating and shaking in a Barnes and Noble parking lot. He ordered coffee and a grilled cheese and tried not to think about the deadline he'd already blown, the advance he'd have to return, the career that was dissolving like sugar in hot water. The waitress was named Ruth. She was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and hands that looked like they'd been washing dishes for 40 years. She didn't smile when she took his order. She didn't ask if he was doing okay or tell him to have a nice day. She just wrote on her pad, poured his coffee, and moved to the next table with the efficiency of someone who had too much to do and no time for performance. Jackson watched her. He'd been watching people his whole life. That's what writers did, supposedly. But he'd never really seen anyone like Ruth. She didn't move like a character in a novel. She moved like a machine. Every gesture precise, every step calculated, every motion serving a purpose. She refilled his coffee 3 times without him asking. The third time he said, "Thank you," and she nodded without looking at him. "You're welcome. Do you always work this shift?" 6 to 2, 6 days a week, 40 years next March. Jackson blinked. 40 years? Same diner? Same shift, same grilled cheese you're eating. She wiped the counter with a rag that had seen better days. Started when I was 20. My husband worked the steel mill. When it closed in 95, I kept working. When he got sick, I worked doubles. When he died, I kept working. When my daughter got into Penn State, I worked extra. When she graduated law school, I was here. When she made partner in Philadelphia, I was here. She said it without pride or self-pity, just facts, just history. That's, Jackson struggled for the right word. Incredible. Ruth looked at him for the first time, really looked at him, and he felt the weight of her assessment. "No," she said. "It's not incredible. It's just what you do. You show up, you do the work, you go home, you do it again. That's not incredible. That's discipline." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him with his cold grilled cheese and his empty notebook and the sudden, uncomfortable realization that he'd never shown up for anything in his life. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. He told himself he was researching, that he was gathering material. that Ruth was a character, and characters needed to be observed. But really, he was hiding. His agent had stopped calling. His publisher had sent a formal letter requesting the return of the advance. His mother had taken a second job, working weekends at a nursing home in Squirrel Hill, and Mia had enrolled in a GED program in Allentown, studying between shifts at Wawa. Jackson should have been helping, should have been doing something, anything, to justify the privilege he'd been born into, the talent he'd squandered, the opportunities he'd wasted because they'd come too easily. Instead, he sat in Marie's diner and watched Ruth work. He watched her memorize orders without writing them down, watched her balance 6 plates on her arms, moving through the narrow spaces between booths with the grace of a dancer who'd long ago stopped thinking about the steps. Watched her handle a difficult customer, a man who complained about his eggs, sent them back twice, left no tip, with the same flat professionalism she showed everyone else. No anger, no resentment, just the work. On his 7th day, she sat across from him during her break. Brought her own coffee, black, no sugar. "You're a writer," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you carry a notebook. You stare at people like you're trying to steal their souls, and you have that look." What look? The look of someone who's been told they're special and is starting to suspect they aren't. Jackson felt his face burn. "I'm not special. I used to think I was. I'm not." Ruth sipped her coffee. "Talent is cheap, Mr. Writer. You can find it in any kindergarten, any bar, any prison cell. What matters is what you do with it, or what you do without it." "I don't have a choice," Jackson said, and the desperation in his own voice surprised him. "I can't write. I've tried. I sit at my desk for hours and nothing comes. It's like the talent left, like it was never really mine to begin with." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a truck rumbled past, heading toward the interstate, toward some destination Jackson couldn't imagine. "My daughter," she said finally, "wasn't the smartest kid in her class, wasn't the most talented. Her teacher said she was average, said she'd be lucky to get into community college." She smiled, and for the first time, Jackson saw something beyond the flat professionalism. He saw pride, fierce, unapologetic, earned through decades of work. But she had something better than talent. She had a system. Every night, from age 12 to 22, she studied for 3 hours. No exceptions, no excuses. Birthdays, holidays, sick days, she studied. When her friends went to parties, she studied. When her boyfriend broke up with her senior year, she studied through the tears. "And she made it," Jackson said, "law school partner." She made it because she decided to make it. Not because she was destined. Not because she was gifted. Because she chose discipline over comfort, day after day, year after year, until the choice became who she was. Ruth stood, smoothing her apron. "Talent is a head start, Mr. Writer. Discipline is the whole race. And most people never figure out the difference until it's too late." She walked back to the kitchen, leaving Jackson alone with his cold coffee and the first honest thought he'd had in months. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe it was just beginning. He moved to Bethlehem 2 weeks later, gave up the Brooklyn apartment, sold the expensive furniture, used the money to pay back half his advance, and buy a used Honda Civic that smelled like cigarettes and regret. Found a room for rent above a laundromat on East 4th Street, sharing a bathroom with a truck driver named Earl who worked nights and snored like a chainsaw. His mother thought he was having a breakdown. His sister thought he was running away. His agent thought he was destroying his career. Maybe he was. Maybe that was the point. He got a job at Marie's. Ruth didn't hire him. She didn't have that authority. But she told the owner, a Greek man named Gus, who'd inherited the place from his father, that Jackson was harmless and needed to learn something. Gus shrugged and put him on the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., washing dishes and mopping floors and learning to make eggs over easy without breaking the yolk. The first week, Jackson went home every morning and cried. Not from exhaustion, though he was exhausted. Not from humiliation, though there was plenty of that. But from the shock of realizing how little he knew about work, about showing up when you didn't feel like it, when you were sick, when your back ached and your hands were raw from bleach and your mind was screaming that you were meant for something better. He'd always believed that talent exempted you from the mundane, that genius meant floating above the ordinary struggles that consumed everyone else. Now he stood in a steam-filled kitchen at 3 a.m., scraping burnt cheese off a griddle, and understood that he'd been wrong about everything. The second week, something shifted. He started waking up before his alarm, started anticipating the rhythm of the shift, the lull at midnight, the rush at 2 a.m. when the bars closed, the quiet hours before dawn when the regulars came in for coffee and conversation. He started learning names. Mr. Henley, who'd worked at Bethlehem Steel for 30 years and always ordered rye toast, no butter. The Hernandez twins, who drove trucks for a living and argued about baseball. Sarah, a nursing student at Moravian College who studied at the counter between shifts and reminded him of Mia. He started writing again. Not the novel. Not yet. But notes. Observations. Descriptions of the steam rising from the dishwasher. The way Ruth's hands moved when she poured coffee. The sound of the interstate at 4 a.m. when the world felt empty and full at the same time. He filled notebooks, cheap ones from the Dollar General, not the leather-bound journals he'd used at Yale, and left them in his locker, not showing anyone, not thinking about publication or praise or whether he was wasting his gift. He was just writing, every day, before work, after work, during his break if he could steal 15 minutes. No inspiration required, no muse, just the work. Ruth noticed, of course. Ruth noticed everything. "You're different," she said one morning in March as they sat together during her break. The diner was quiet. The early light coming through windows that hadn't been washed in years, dust motes dancing in the sun. "Different how? You're still here. Most people like you." She paused, choosing her words. "Most people with your background. They last a month. Maybe 2. Then they decide it's too hard, too boring, too beneath them. They go back to whatever they were running from, convinced they've found themselves." Jackson laughed, But it was a real laugh this time, not the hollow sound he'd made for years. "I'm not going back. I don't have anything to go back to." "That's not true. You have talent. You have education. You have options most people in this diner will never have." Ruth leaned forward, her voice dropping. "But you're starting to understand that those things aren't enough, that they were never enough, that the only thing that ever mattered was whether you do the work, day after day, even when nobody cared, even when nobody was watching." Jackson looked at his hands, still soft compared to Ruth's, still bearing the faint marks of a life spent typing rather than laboring, but harder than they'd been, more calloused, more real. "I used to think discipline was boring," he said, "that it was for people who didn't have what I had. I thought talent meant freedom, that I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and the words would always be there. And now I think discipline is the only freedom I've ever had. The only thing that's ever made me feel like I'm actually doing something instead of just waiting for something to happen to me." Ruth nodded, satisfied, and finished her coffee. "Then you're ready," she said. "Ready for what?" "For the next part." The next part started with a girl. Her name was Emily Carter, and she came into Marie's on a Tuesday in April, during the lunch rush, looking like she'd been crying. She was maybe 25, with dark hair and a navy blazer that didn't quite fit, carrying a briefcase that looked expensive and heavy. She sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and stared at her phone for 10 minutes without touching it. Jackson was bussing tables, but he watched her in the way he'd learned to watch everyone, without judgment, without the desperate need to turn her into a character, just seeing her as she was. Ruth served her, brought the coffee, took her order, a BLT, no mayo, and moved on. But when she came back with the sandwich, Emily was crying. Not loudly. Silently, tears running down her face, her shoulders shaking, trying to hide it behind her hair. Ruth did something Jackson had never seen her do. She sat down, put her hand on Emily's arm, said in a voice softer than Jackson had thought possible, "Honey, what's wrong?" Emily looked up, surprised, and the story came out in fragments. She was a lawyer, had been a lawyer anyway, worked at a firm in Philadelphia, 60-hour weeks, climbing the ladder, doing everything right. And that morning, she'd been fired. Not for performance. Her reviews were excellent, but the firm was restructuring, right-sizing, pivoting to new markets. Her boss, a man she'd worked for 3 years, had called her into his corner office with its view of the Schuylkill River and told her she was surplus to requirements. She'd walked out with a box of personal items and a severance package that wouldn't cover 2 months of her Center City rent. She'd driven to Bethlehem because she didn't know where else to go. Her parents were dead. Her sister lived in Seattle, and they hadn't spoken in years. She had no one. "I did everything right," she said, her voice breaking. "I worked harder than anyone. I sacrificed everything. And it doesn't matter. None of it matters." Ruth listened. Jackson listened, standing frozen with a tray of dirty dishes, unable to move, unable to look away. When Emily finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You worked hard for someone else's dream. That's not discipline. That's just obedience. Real discipline is choosing what you're working for and then working for it no matter what. Emily looked up confused. I don't understand. You were good at law? I was great at law. But did you love it? A pause. Then barely audible. No. Then you're not losing anything. You're being freed. The question is what you'll do with that freedom. Ruth stood, smoothing her apron. My daughter, she's a partner in Philadelphia now. Big firm, big money, big stress. She calls me every Sunday and tells me she's proud of what she built. And I believe her. Because she chose it. She didn't fall into it. She didn't drift. She decided, and she worked, and she earned every bit of it. She looked at Jackson then, and he felt the weight of her gaze. Mr. Cole here is learning the same lesson. He had talent, lost it, and is finding something better, something he can build, something that can't be taken away. Emily looked at Jackson, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he recognized. The same desperation he'd felt in Brooklyn. The same fear that the ground was giving way beneath your feet, and there was nothing solid to hold on to. What's your name? She asked. Jackson. Jackson. She tried the name out, tasting it. What are you building? He thought about the notebooks in his locker, the pages filled with observations, with stories that weren't about genius or prodigies or the voice of a generation. Stories about steelworkers and truck drivers and waitresses who'd worked the same shift for 40 years. About the quiet dignity of showing up. About the radical act of doing the work when nobody cared. I'm not sure yet, he said, but I'm building it every day. That's all I know. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she wiped her eyes, picked up her coffee, and took a sip. Can I help? She asked. They started meeting at the diner after her shifts ended. Emily had taken a job at a legal aid clinic in Allentown, helping immigrants and low-income families navigate a system that chewed people up and spat them out. It paid a third of what she'd made in Philadelphia, but she woke up every morning knowing why she was doing it. She came to Marie's at 6 p.m. when Jackson was finishing his shift, and they'd walk along the Lehigh River, talking about her cases, about his writing, about the future they were both trying to build from the wreckage of their old lives. She was the first person he showed his notebooks to. Not all of them, just the ones that felt ready, that felt like they might be something more than therapy. She read them on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on the hood of his Honda in a park near the river, and when she finished, she was quiet for a long time. These are good, she said finally. Good enough? Good enough for what? He didn't have an answer. That was the problem, and the freedom. He wasn't writing for an advance anymore, wasn't writing for reviews or praise or the validation of people who decided he was special before he decided anything. He was writing because he'd built a habit, a discipline, a practice that had become as necessary as breathing. I don't know, he said. I just know I have to keep doing it. Emily closed the notebook and looked at him. The spring sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in colors he would try to describe later, knowing he'd fail, knowing that was the point. Then keep doing it, she said, and I'll keep showing up. That's the deal, right? We build our systems, we do the work, we see what happens. He kissed her then, for the first time, and it felt less like romance and more like commitment. Like two people who'd learned the hard way that love wasn't a feeling you fell into, but a choice you made, day after day, even when it was hard, even when you weren't sure. 6 months later, Jackson finished his second novel. It wasn't like the first. It didn't pour out of him in a fever dream of inspiration. It came slowly, painfully, one sentence at a time, revised and revised again until he wasn't sure if he was making it better or just different. He wrote it in his room above the laundromat, in the diner during breaks, in the park by the river on Sunday afternoons, while Emily read briefs beside him. He called it The System. It was about a waitress in Pennsylvania who'd worked the same shift for 40 years, and a writer who'd lost everything and found something better, and a lawyer who'd learned that success without meaning was just another kind of failure. It was about discipline, about showing up, about the radical, revolutionary act of doing the work when nobody was watching. He sent it to his old agent on a whim, not expecting anything. The advance was long gone, the relationship strained, the bridges mostly burned. 2 weeks later, the agent called. "It's not what I expected," he said. "No," Jackson agreed, "it's not. It's better." Jackson waited. "I have a small press in mind. Independent. They won't pay what you're used to, but they'll care about it. They'll put everything into it." "Okay." "And Jackson?" The agent's voice was different now, less transactional, more human. "This is the real thing. Whatever you did out there, keep doing it." The System was published 18 months later by a press in Portland, Oregon, with a print run of 5,000 copies and no marketing budget. Jackson did a reading at a bookstore in Bethlehem, 20 people in attendance, most of them regulars from Marie's. Ruth was there, sitting in the back, her arms crossed, looking satisfied. The reviews were quiet but genuine. No voice of a generation this time, no six-figure advances. But readers wrote to him, emails, letters, messages on social media, telling him the book had changed how they thought about work, about success, about what mattered. One letter came from a high school English teacher in Akron, Ohio. She'd given the book to a student who'd been told he wasn't college material, a kid who worked nights at a gas station and wrote poems on receipt paper. The student had read it 3 times and started waking up at 5 a.m. to write before school. "I don't know if he'll be a writer," the teacher wrote, "but I know he's starting to believe he could be. Thank you for that." Jackson read the letter at the diner during his break and felt something he hadn't felt since before the fire. Not pride exactly, not the old arrogance of talent. Something quieter, something earned. He showed it to Ruth. She read it twice, folded it carefully, handed it back. "That's the point," she said. "That's why we do the work. Not for the praise, for the possibility that someone else might start." Emily moved in with him the following spring, not into the room above the laundromat. They found a small apartment near the river with a window that faced east and caught the morning light. She kept working at the legal aid clinic, kept fighting for people the system wanted to forget. He kept writing, kept working shifts at Marie's when Gus needed him. kept building the discipline that had become the foundation of everything. His mother came to visit. She was different now, older, tireder, but with a peace in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She'd cut back to one job, started reading again, joined a book club at the library in Squirrel Hill. She brought Mia, who'd finished her GED and was taking classes at Lehigh Carbon Community College, planning to become a teacher. They sat around a table in Jackson and Emily's apartment, eating takeout from Marie's, and for the first time in years, Jackson felt like he was part of a family. Not the fractured, struggling unit they'd been after the fire, but something new. Something built, day by day, choice by choice, through the discipline of showing up for each other even when it was hard. His mother pulled him aside before she left, took his hands in hers, nurse's hands, rough and capable, and looked at him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "I never read your first book," she said. "I was always working. Always too tired. I'm sorry for that." "Mom!" "But I read this one." She smiled, and he saw tears in her eyes. "I read it twice. And I understood finally what you were trying to tell me all those years. That it wasn't about being special. It was about being there, about doing the work, about loving people through the boring days, the hard days, the days when you don't feel like it." She squeezed his hands. "I'm proud of you, Jackson. Not because you're talented, because you learned what matters." The call came on a Tuesday morning, 8 a.m., while Jackson was making coffee before his shift. A voice he didn't recognize. A producer from a podcast in New York. Something about American success stories. Something about discipline. Something about wanting to interview him for a series they were doing. "We read your book," the producer said. "We think our audience needs to hear this. The idea that discipline beats talent. That success isn't about what you're born with, but what you choose to build." Jackson thought about it, thought about the platform, the exposure, the possibility of returning to the world he'd left behind. Then he thought about Ruth, about to start her shift, about Emily, already at the clinic, about his mother, sleeping before her evening shift, about Mia, studying in Allentown. "Can I bring someone?" he asked. "Who?" "My friend Ruth. She's the real story. I'm just the one who wrote it down." A pause, then, "We'd love that." They recorded the interview in the diner during the quiet hours between breakfast and lunch. Ruth sat across from the host, uncomfortable with the microphone, answering questions in her flat, matter-of-fact way. "Why did you stay?" the host asked. 40 years. Same diner. Same shift. "Why?" Ruth shrugged. "Because I said I would. Because people needed me to. Because the work needed doing and I could do it." "Did you ever want to do something else? Be something else?" "Sure. When I was young, I wanted to be a dancer. I was good too, took classes at a studio in Easton. But then my mother got sick, and someone had to work, and dancing didn't pay the bills. So I made a choice. Not a sacrifice, a choice. I chose to show up. I chose to be reliable. I chose to build something steady in a world that kept trying to knock me down." She looked at Jackson then, and he saw the pride in her eyes that he'd seen once before, talking about her daughter. "And I'm not saying everyone should be a waitress for 40 years. I'm saying everyone should find their system. The thing they can do day after day that makes them feel like they're contributing, like they're building something, like they matter. The host turned to Jackson. And you? What would you tell someone who's struggling, who feels like they don't have what it takes? Jackson thought about the fire, about the blank pages, about the nights in the steam-filled kitchen, scraping burnt cheese, wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. I'd tell them that talent is a gift you can't control, he said, but discipline is a choice you make every morning. I'd tell them that the most successful people in American history weren't always the most gifted. They were the ones who kept showing up when everyone else went home. The ones who built systems when others waited for inspiration. The ones who chose the work day after day until the work chose them back. He paused, looking at Ruth, at Emily standing in the doorway with coffee for the crew, at the diner that had become more of a home than any apartment he'd ever had. I'd tell them that discipline beats talent every single time. Not because talent doesn't matter, but because talent without discipline is just potential. And potential means nothing until you do the work to unlock it. The podcast went live 3 months later. It got millions of downloads. Suddenly, people were talking about Ruth, about Marie's, about the idea that success wasn't about being special, but about being steady. Jackson got calls from bigger publishers, offers for speaking engagements, invitations to universities where professors who'd once praised his natural genius now wanted to discuss his philosophy of work. He turned most of them down, kept writing, kept working shifts at Marie's when Gus needed him, kept walking by the river with Emily on Sunday afternoons, planning a future they were building together, one choice at a time. Ruth retired the following year on the 40th anniversary of her first shift. The diner closed for the afternoon. Gus gave a speech. Jackson gave a better one. Ruth sat through both, looking embarrassed and pleased, and when it was over, she pulled Jackson aside. "You're going to be tempted," she said, "by the money, the attention, the chance to be special again. Don't be. You've got something better now. You've got a practice, a system, a life. Don't trade that for anything." "I won't," he said. And for the first time in his life, he knew it was true. They got married in the spring, in a small ceremony by the river. His mother walked him down the aisle. Mia was the maid of honor. Ruth gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Emily was pregnant by summer. They named the baby Grace because that's what their love had required. Grace upon grace, choice upon choice, day after day. Jackson finished his third novel in the hospital waiting room the night Grace was born. It was about a family built not by blood or talent or luck, but by the radical, revolutionary act of showing up for each other again and again until showing up became love. He dedicated it to Ruth. Years later, when people asked Jackson Cole about his success, about the books, the following, the life he'd built from the ashes of his old one, he always told the same story. Not about Yale, not about the debut novel, not about the six-figure advance or the praise or the promise that he was special. He told them about a fire, about a diner in Pennsylvania, about a waitress who'd worked the same shift for 40 years and taught him that talent was cheap, but discipline was everything. He told them about a blank page, about the terror of having nothing to say, about the slow, painful discovery that the words didn't come from some mysterious gift. They came from showing up day after day until the showing up became the gift. He told them about love, about a lawyer who'd lost everything and found something better, about a daughter named Grace, about the understanding that the most important things in life weren't things you fell into, but things you built, choice by choice, until the building became who you were. And he always ended with the same words, the lesson that had taken him a lifetime to learn. Talent is what you're given, discipline is what you earn, and only one of those can be taken away from you. Oh. Closing note. Hey, if this story found its way into your heart, if you saw yourself in Jackson or Ruth or Emily, if you're sitting there right now wondering whether you have what it takes, I want you to hear this. You do. Not because you're talented, not because you're special, but because you can choose right now to show up, to build your system, to do the work when nobody's watching, when nobody cares, when the only reason to keep going is the promise you made to yourself. That's where the magic lives. That's where the transformation happens. In the boring moments, the hard moments, the moments when quitting would be so much easier and you choose to keep going anyway. Pick one thing, one habit, one commitment, and be disciplined about it for 30 days. Not because you feel like it, because you decided to. Watch what happens. Watch how the reps become reflex, the routine becomes instinct, the work becomes the gift. Remember, the most successful people in American history weren't always the most gifted. They were the ones who kept showing up when everyone else went home. The ones who chose discipline over comfort, day after day, until discipline chose them back. I'm rooting for you. I believe in you. Now get out there and build your system. Good luck. And if these stories of discipline, determination, and American grit speak to something in you, if they make you want to become your own proof that hard work beats raw talent, then stick around. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change how you see your own potential. We've got so much more coming. Stories of ordinary people who became extraordinary through nothing but relentless, boring, beautiful discipline. Stories that remind you you don't need to be born special. You just need to refuse to stay ordinary. Be on this channel, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.